I'm Nicole Friedrich. Welcome to the show. German lawmakers are about to vote for a second time on electing Conservative candidate Friedrich Merz as chancellor just hours after he suffered a historic defeat in the first round. We're about to see live pictures from Parliament where lawmakers are gathering right now. Despite having a slim majority with his new coalition, Merz only received 310 votes of the 316 needed. It's the first time in Germany's post-war history that a candidate has failed in the first round. The ballot is secret, so it's unclear exactly who voted against him. Merz's coalition with the Social Democrats was made official just yesterday. We'll go live to the vote in about 10 minutes' time. First, let's speak to our chief political editor, Michaela Küfner. Michaela, lots of twists and turns today. Now we'll have a second vote in Parliament in about 10 minutes. How confident are party leaders there of the Conservative Union bloc and the Social Democrats, of course, to have all the 316 votes this time to elect Friedrich Merz?
They are very confident. Then again, that's what I would have told you this morning. And I did indeed, that everybody was very confident that Friedrich Merz can pass this vote easily. He had a comfortable majority. He had, in theory, 12 votes more than he absolutely needed, those 316, and it didn't come about. And that's why we saw the chief whip, the parliamentary group leader from the Conservative CDU-CSU, once again warn actually fellow MPs that they should live up to this responsibility that is before them. We of course have both sides of this coalition, the Conservative camp and the SPD, not being able to imagine that it could have been any of their own, that they would have lost those decisive votes. We will never find out what the reason was, but this second vote that is upcoming is expected to be the decisive one. If it isn't, it would no longer just be a shock to the system, it really would be an all-out catastrophe. And then we would be asking very different questions over whether this is the actual candidate. But that is a very, very long way from having that debate as we await the second round of voting.
Tumultuous hours there at the Bundestag for sure throughout the day. It did look like a second round of voting would not happen today. There were procedural questions. Many MPs didn't even know if it was possible to hold a new vote on the same day. Now suddenly there is a vote just minutes away. Why that change now?
Well, actually, not so much changed, but there was this element of extreme caution. I spoke to people involved who were telling me they needed to do checks of procedure because there are procedural time limits, and all parties except the AfD party were needed to basically surrender that right of having a longer time period until the next vote takes time. And then lawyers were sitting across this and looking at this very closely for hours to make absolutely sure that a second vote today cannot be successfully contested in the courts, because everybody is expecting that to happen, if it's not from the actual far-right AfD party, but from individuals in the public. And because this has such huge consequences, that's where those hours that we've been here and wondering what would actually happen came about. Now all sides were legally certain, and that's when we saw this announcement a short while ago that the second vote will go ahead. In parallel, of course, we saw the parliamentary groups reassuring themselves that this time this will go through smooth sailing. Otherwise, certainly the Conservative CDU-CSU, I'm sure, would not have proceeded and asked for the second vote to go ahead.
We're looking at Parliament there right now. The seats are slowly starting to fill up again. While we wait for that vote, I want to take a look at a report that you filed recently, because you followed Merz's political journey for many years, and we can now take a closer look at the potential next German chancellor.
Friedrich Merz sees himself as the man who can fix Germany and Europe. The politician turned top finance executive turned politician again is known for his CEO take on politics. Germany, he says, has to improve its performance on the world stage.
I know that many of you expect more German leadership than we have seen in the last years.
Germany, he vows, will no longer be out of the picture, like at the impromptu peace talks on Ukraine during the funeral for Pope Francis. And Merz has a ready answer for an America threatening to turn its back on Europe. Someone from where you're standing right now, what is your message to Donald Trump?
The key message to Donald Trump is Germany is back on track. Germany will fulfill the obligations in terms of defense, and Germany is willing to strengthen their own competitiveness. And that is not just Germany, that is Europe.
Just days ago, Merz doubled down on his resolve that Europe cannot afford to give in over Ukraine, a war he sees as a battle for democratic values.
Wir sind nicht Kriegspartei.
We are not party to this war, and we do not want to become that. But neither are we unaffected bystanders or intermediaries.
Zwischen den Fronten.
Tying Germany's fate even closer to embattled Ukraine could prove a tough sell at home. The stakes are high, and Merz, who spent more than a decade in business, is beaming with confidence. He says he can turn Germany's flat economy around, and he promises a radical change on migration.
Ich werde im Fall meiner Wahl zum Bundeskanzler der Bundesrepublik Deutschland
I will instruct the Federal Ministry of the Interior, using the Chancellor's authority to issue directives, to permanently control all Germany's national borders with its neighbours.
die deutschen Staatsgrenzen zu allen unseren Nachbarn dauerhaft zu kontrollieren.
Whether he can deliver on any of these pledges will also depend on whether he's able to find compromise with his coalition partner, the Social Democrat SPD. Compromise is not the forte of the man who only recently clashed with former Chancellor Angela Merkel over his decision to accept votes from the far-right AfD to pass a migration motion. Thousands took to the streets protesting Merz's move. He found himself on the back foot, repeating his firewall pledge over and over again.
We will not cooperate with the party that calls itself the Alternative for Germany.
Nicht zusammenarbeiten.
Many in his own political camp feel the disappointing election result of 28.5% for the conservative CDU-CSU was caused by Merz's flirt with the far-right AfD. While his maneuver remained unpopular, his determination to act on migration struck a chord, and it underlined how Friedrich Merz is in many ways the opposite of Angela Merkel. Their parallel rise to the top of the conservative CDU party in the 90s and early 2000s turned into a political feud when Merkel beat him to become parliamentary party leader. Frustrated, Merz left politics altogether and made his fortune as a lawyer and board member for the American investment giant BlackRock. A CV Merz sees as an asset, while his critics fault him for his lack of experience in government. The incoming leader of Europe's largest economy faces the enormous task of reigniting the German economy and stabilizing Europe. Huge expectations that will put Merz to the test from day one.
A report there by our chief political editor, Michaela Küfner, who's still with us there from the Bundestag. That, Michaela, was, of course, before he lost the first vote. Back then, he was beaming with confidence, but Merz has always been a controversial figure, hasn't he? Could this be the reason he didn't get enough votes today, even from within the coalition he himself forged?
The short answer is yes. We know that he can be abrasive even amongst people who are firmly on his side. And I don't know whether you just were able to hear the bell, which sounded like a fire alarm. We're just getting the signal that MPs are now being called back for that second vote to take place very shortly. And he is clearly someone who somewhat was out of practice in seeking a compromise when he re-entered politics and then took several attempts to actually become the leader of the CDU party here in Germany, and he likes to chair meetings very much CEO style. He's very much result focused, And Germany, it's not a presidential system, it's not a chancellor system. It is a system that is built on broad-based support in parliament. That means that everybody in the political game is very much used to not being able to deliver 100% of what their plans are, because they know, and it has always been like this here in Germany, they need to seek compromise within their own party, but also with other parties to reach a stable government and to reach majorities. And I think it's safe to say that took a while to sink in with Friedrich Merz, and today he, at the very least, got the lesson that he cannot act alone, and very publicly he got that lesson, which could undermine that whatever he promises abroad he can actually fulfill, unless he manages to find a rapport very quickly with those MPs, and particularly the ones that didn't vote for him, although he will never find out who they were, but he will have to be seen to treat the MPs with the respect they clearly demanded here today by not letting him simply pass through smooth sailing.
Yeah, we're actually seeing him there right now, all smiles at the floor of the Bundestag. A short while ago, we saw Lars Klingbeil, the head of the SPD, as well. He, too, looked very optimistic. How much is there to lose politically for that coalition of the CDU, CSU and SPD if this new vote that is about to happen fails again?
Well, let's put it this way. This morning, that was a severe blow. Everybody's somewhat recovering from that. Another blow like this, that could knock him out. It really could, because it would raise very different questions if he's twice over not able to get the majority from his own coalition camp. And I stress coalition. It's not necessarily the Conservative CDU, CSU. It could also be from the Social Democrats. We will never know this. There are reasons for both sides to do this. The Social Democrats weren't very keen to go into another coalition, though they negotiated very, very well with the ministries that they got, particularly the finance ministry. And in his own political camp, there's still a lot of critics who feel the CDU, CSU could have gotten a much bigger share, several percentage points they feel could have been lost with Friedrich Merz having accepted far-right AfD votes, a political maneuver many felt was completely unnecessary. So Merz picking a fight where it's not necessary, and also then in the end being the one who breaks with the debt brake enshrined in the German constitution, although he won the elections promising not to touch it. That's also something many people criticize him for, and also within his own political quarters. So these are the issues that could have made a difference. But then there's, of course, always a human factor. People who didn't get a ministerial post, who didn't make it into his cabinet. We will never know. But we will find out in a few minutes from now whether they just wanted to teach him a lesson or whether they want to sink his political career altogether. And this is what the next vote is going to be about.
Exactly, and you'll be there following it all for us and updating us as soon as we have information on the outcome. The vote is about to start in about 1 minute. That was Chief Political Editor Michaela Kuvner. Thank you so much for the time being. And we could hear the bell ringing there. DW's Chief International Editor Richard Walker is with me in the studio here in Berlin. The vote is about to take place. What can you tell us about how it's all going to unfold from here on out?
So, Nicole, it's just like, I'm feeling like, the movie Groundhog Day here.
You've been here for a couple of hours, haven't you?
Okay, 6 hours ago, I was here explaining what was going to happen. And obviously, we heard what happened, that Friedrich Merz didn't manage.
Quite a bit of history happened since then.
Now we're kind of back to the beginning of this process, and we shall see, obviously. So that bell is being called to order. Then you're going to have the Speaker of the Parliament saying a few words, and basically what we're waiting for is this voting process to begin again. And what happens is that each of the members of Parliament is called to vote, and then they vote in secret. As Michaela referred to, this creates this sort of air of mystery about who the people were who did not vote for Friedrich Merz the first time around. Everybody's presumably been given a very stern talking to about if you were one of those who didn't vote for him, think about the consequences of that and please vote for him this time. So that whole period, this whole process of all of the parliamentarians there are 600 plus of them. That takes, including the tally, then afterwards, it takes probably just a little bit more than an hour. Yeah. So in maybe an hour and 15 minutes, something like that, we should hear the result. And just to kind of refresh memories about the number of votes that are needed. So this coalition of these parties, of the Conservatives and the Social Democrats, so centre-right and centre-left together, they have 328 seats in the parliament. And they need 316 to have a majority for Friedrich Merz. So there's a bit of play there where he can afford to lose a few votes. But of course, first round, he got 310. Yeah. Not enough. So he lost 18 somehow. So that's going to be the number to listen out for in about an hour and 15 minutes. Is he over the 316? Yeah. Of course, what he would dearly like is him to be on 328. You know, he'd have the full backing now of the two parties. We shall see if that happens. If all of those people who didn't vote for him the first time round, kind of do some soul searching and come round for him. So that is about an hour and 15 minutes. Then Merz gets in a car and he drives a few minutes down the road to the presidential palace where Frank-Walter Steinmeier, so that's German president, so this is the sort of the head of state. So, you know, the head of state and head of government are separated in Germany. So it's a bit like a king or queen in the UK, does the ceremonial stuff, including all of this dealing with these constitutional issues of kind of bringing in a new government. And then they will do their formalities. So essentially then Friedrich Merz will be declared to be chancellor and receive a certificate saying such from the president. Then Merz gets back in his car, comes back to Parliament, and then gives his oath of office. So where he swears loyalty to the German people and to the German constitution and so on. So it looks like we're getting started just soon. Just tell me if you want me to shut up.
I think it'll be a while. There's still plenty of empty seats there, but...
Okay, so then I can just tell you, okay, so then he does his oath of office, then he gets back in his car, so he's back and forth a bit, Merz, during the rest of this day, and together with his ministers, and they all go back to the presidential palace, and all of the ministers in the new government, some of whom we see in this picture here, they all also get named.
The session that was interrupted is now
all right,
resumed,
let's listen in to
and I would
the
like
president
to
of the German
thank
Parliament
you
there.
for your patience, and those of you who have been watching this session may not be aware of the fact that we had quite a long interruption of this session because the parliamentary groups had to deliberate. I will explain that in a bit more detail. Namely, there is a deviation from the rules of procedure. So the deliberations of the parliamentary group are concluding according to Article 63, para 3 of our rules of procedure. The CDU, CSU, and SPD parliamentary groups have suggested that Friedrich Merz that we enter into elections to vote him as chancellor. Now, the CDU, CSU, SPD, the Green Party and the Left Party have put forward a motion to have this ballot be separated from Article 78 of our rules of procedure. So we are deviating from that. These are rules that are possible. For this, according to para 120 of our rules of procedure, a two-thirds majority of MPs present in Parliament is necessary. And I have seen that there are calls for the floor. And since all of the parliamentary groups have called for the floor, Stefan Bilger, CDU, CSU, has 3 minutes time allocated to him to speak on this subject. President of the Bundestag, ladies and gentlemen, the situation is as it is serious. Electing the German chancellor is the most important election that the parliament can carry out. And this is why a lot is at stake here. It is about the capacity to act of our state and the functioning of our democracy. Germany needs a government. But it's also about implementing the will of the electorate, solving the problems facing our country. The people in this country need these problems to be tackled, and this is why we cannot wait to form a new government. We, the CDU, CSU, and SPD parliamentary groups believe that today we need to have a second round of voting for German Chancellor. And we propose, the CDU, CSU, and SPD parliamentary groups propose Friedrich Merz as the candidate for Chancellor. The facts of the case are clear. The name of the candidate is known to all, which is why we think it is absolutely acceptable to enter into a second round of voting today. We would therefore like to use the rules of procedure to deviate from the usual deadline for the next round of voting. And I would like to thank everyone, the SPD, the Green Party, the Left Party as well. It is a good sign if we can enter into a second round of voting today. Colleagues, this coalition has undertaken a good and ambitious coalition agreement supported by the three coalition parties. And finally, this government can get down to business if we have concluded these round of voting for Friedrich Merz as Chancellor candidate. Thank you very much. For the AfD parliamentary group, Dr. Baumann has the floor. President of the Bundestag, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Merz, you have failed. This is a historical defeat that we have never seen in the German lower house of parliament, the Bundestag, before. Your own MPs do not follow you, do not support you. And is it surprising if we look at the amount of electoral fraud, the number of promises you have broken to your voters? I hope there are some good people in the CDU who did not give you the votes. They want the CDU to come back to where it should be, and it's still possible to set the course anew, ladies and gentlemen. There's now going to be a second round of voting. We will not refuse to vote because we have to lay our cards on the table. We need a government for Germany. We will support this as well. We will not stop it happening. But even if Mr. Merz is voted in now, you have spoken to the Green Party, the Left Party, the SPD. You got their support, perhaps, in some cases. But this government is beginning in a very unstable manner, and it will stay unstable. And that's the opposite of what Germany needs, ladies and gentlemen. Because one thing is for sure, the results of elections show that there is a majority for all of the points that you promised in your election campaign. Every MP was voted by the electorate. We are all here because of the will of the people, and all of the demands that you promised could be fulfilled, but you're preventing it. And this leads to a lack of stability in Parliament and in Germany. We from the AfD do not only approve the second round of elections because we want the cards on the table, but we also stand willing to fulfill sensible responses to the problems facing Germany, problems you promised to solve. We are available for any sensible responses to the problems facing this country. That's all from me, ladies and gentlemen. And for the SPD parliamentary group, Katja Mast has the floor. President of the Bundestag, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Germany is facing major challenges. We have managed to agree on a coalition agreement quickly between the CDU, CSU and the SPD, in which we present responses to the challenges facing us in the future. Where will the jobs of the future be found? How can workers take home more pay? What about growth? And how can we ensure we remain capable for acting in international times, in times in which we get headlines from the US and Russia again and again? Germany is one of the most important players in the EU and in the world when it comes to pursuing peace and democracy. And what's important here is to do justice to the responsibility that we have. It is a big responsibility, and it is bigger than each and every MP in this Parliament, which is why we want to have a new Chancellor quickly and a new government quickly, so that we can document our capacity to act and so that we can pursue good policy moving forward. And that doesn't mean debates on rules of procedure, whether one should approve the motion or not. Good policy means improving everyday lives for the people in this country. That's what it's about today. And that's why I am grateful to all of the democratic parliamentary groups, the CDU, CSU, the SPD, the Green Party, and the Left Party. I am grateful that we put forward and supported the motion to not string things out. Otherwise, we would have had to have waited 3 days before it would have been legal for us to carry out a second round of voting. It is well and good that we have waived this period of time with a two-thirds majority so that we can do this today. We need to show that we take responsibility for the future of our country, and we do not want to see the AfD shoddy responses who think they know the gospel. We know the responses that we need in this country for the future. So please support our motion to vote today. Thank you. For the parliamentary group, the Greens, Dr. Irina Mikhailich has the floor. President of the Bundestag, colleagues, I don't want to mince my words. I want to say that democracy and democratic processes are working. What we've experienced today is a democratic process. These are processes set out in our Constitution with rules of procedure for our Parliament that are set out in detail in case we encounter a case like this one. All the same, it's a historic moment because you, as the CDU, CSU, and SPD have agreed on a coalition agreement, but you were not able to get the majority you needed in Parliament in your first round of elections. So that means that the MPs who in the future are going to be voting on laws in the future, it would seem, do not sufficiently support you and trust you, Mr. Merz. So that means you do not have a clear, stable majority in your government. And this is a decisive aspect. This is going to generate uncertainty in this country. And you, and only you, are responsible for this. So what that means as well is that it's not democracy that's at risk. It is your MPs' trust in you that is endangered. But you have to solve that problem all on your own. What we will help you do is help you with the parliamentary processes, because as the Green Party, we believe that if you want to make a quick decision about your chancellor candidate, you should do it quickly. Because we want The time of uncertainty and lack of clarity that you are generating in our country is something that is kept as brief as possible. And this is why, together with all of the democratic parliamentary groups, the CDU, CSU, the SPD, the Left Party, and with the Green Party, we are raising this procedural motion that makes it possible to carry out a second round of voting today. Ladies and gentlemen of the coalition, you should not confuse this with our approval of your policies. The policies that you, as the Union and the SPD parties, have agreed on in your coalition agreement is not the right thing for our country, which is why, Mr. Merz, we will not be electing you as the Chancellor. The necessary majority for your political course is one that you will have to create yourself. Thank you. And for the Left Party, Christian Dörte has the floor. President of the Bundestag, Mr. Merz, 18 votes. You were missing in your coalition in your first round of voting. And I have to say, from the point of view of the Left Party, this is a dramatic defeat, but not just one for you. It is also a defeat for your co-vice chancellor, possibly, Lars Klingbeil. And I think this is a settling of accounts for your attempt to enforce policies. But it is also a settling of accounts from our perspective for a poor, truly poor coalition agreement. A coalition agreement that does not tackle the major problems facing this country, doesn't even try to solve them. It literally does nothing about child poverty, combating child poverty or old age poverty. The rich are being indulged and housing problems continue. And one thing is for sure, neither today, nor tomorrow, nor the day after will we be supporting you as the Left Party for this reason. All we want is clarity. We want to know what's going to happen next with this country. And this is why, together with all of the democratic parliamentary groups, we are submitting this procedural motion. We are not approving of your policy by doing so. And since the AfD has already been heckling in the meantime, you are interested, the AfD is interested in inducing chaos because that is your elixir of life for a party. I mean, I've been in this parliament for some time now, and your aim has always been to discredit this parliament, to abuse the offices in order to live your contempt of other people and set the wrong course for Germany. Let me say that without mincing my words. And you said, when Germany is doing badly, the AfD is doing well. That was your quote. And this is why today we are voting for this point of order, this motion that makes it possible to have a second round of voting today, because we are the firewall against the right-wing extremists, which we now are sure they all are. Thank you. I would now conclude.
Our chief international editor, Richard Walker, is still here in the studio with me. This is not the vote we've been talking about, right? There was a lot of talk about a vote, but this is something else.
Yeah. So first of all, we're in a parliamentary procedure. So what happened earlier today was that Friedrich Merz did not get a majority required to become chancellor. Now, according to the German constitution, then that just means there can be another round of voting, and that needs to take place within 2 weeks. But the parties are clearly interested to get this done quickly. Mm-hmm. But according to the parliamentary procedures in the parliament, the normal timeline would be that you would bring a motion back to parliament 3 days later, so that'll be Friday.
Right.
But they want to pull this forward, and in order to do that, you need a 2/3 majority in the parliament. So this is what this debate was just about. And essentially, the Social Democrats and the Conservatives, so the two parties in this coalition, did a deal with the Green Party, so the Environmentalist Progressive Party, and the Left Party, and this is quite interesting, so the sort of far left, sort of ultra-progressive party. They both signaled, we'll support that. We want to get this done and dusted as well. And that is quite controversial because the Conservatives, Friedrich Merz's party, have traditionally had a position that they don't want to cooperate with the Left Party. They see them as too extreme.
Yep.
So I think that is a sign that they're really quite desperate to get this moving forward. I think this will be seen for the Left Party something of a win, of a kind of, they've taken part in this, and the Conservatives have kind of got over this issue that they have with the Left Party. But interestingly, the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, so the far-right party, also signalling there from their speaker that they won't oppose this.
Let's listen into the Speaker of Parliament there for a second, because the vote has just gone through by show of hands.
Und der Nachweis der Teilnahme an der Wahl kann nur durch die Abgabe dieses Wahlausweises erbracht werden. Und ich erinnere auch noch mal an das Film- und Fotografierverbot der ausgefüllten Stimmkarte. Ich bitte jetzt die eingeteilten Stimmführerinnen und Stimmführer, die vorgesehenen Plätze einzunehmen und frage, ob die Urnen alle besetzt
go
sind.
to their places, and I'd like to ask whether the
Bedanke mich,
ballot
Sie sind
boxes are
besetzt.
all
Und nun bitte ich
supervised. They are. We will now proceed with the vote.
Okay, so
This is the real deal now.
So it
This
looks
is
like
the second
that has
round.
gone through. There wasn't any significant opposition. We didn't catch the exact results of that, but that's now gone through. And now this second vote for Friedrich Merz takes place.
We heard it before. Michaela said that he has more of a CEO approach to politics. He's not known as a great diplomat. Is that what came back to bite him in this case?
I mean, we're going to be speculating about this for a long time, and I think there are lots of conceivable reasons, but I think that it's likely that that played a role. I mean, it's interesting because Friedrich Merz is someone who, on the one hand, he's been around in politics, either in the foreground or in the background, for many, many decades. I mean, he first got elected to the European Parliament, if I'm not mistaken, in 1989. So he had a first stint in the European Parliament before coming back to Germany and getting involved in domestic politics in Germany. And he was a high flyer at the time, and he was seen as a potential future leader of the party. But he was a contemporary of Angela Merkel. And Angela Merkel, as we saw, she came through, became the leader of the Conservative Party.
Outmaneuvered him, and he held a grudge for over a decade.
Yeah, outmaneuvered him, became chancellor. He eventually quit, thinking, all right, I'm not going to get ahead as long as she's in charge. So there was a real personal rivalry there. Then he went off and worked in the private sector, and he famously worked for the international investment company BlackRock, and he was their boss in Germany. So he kind of left politics for around a decade, made plenty of money, but was always seen as kind of somebody in waiting, sort of with an eye on his watch, hoping that Angela Merkel would at some point get lost. And he started to make a comeback before she actually left office. And there he had he attempted to kind of become the leader of the Conservative Party while she was still in office as chancellor. But that didn't go so smoothly for him either. He failed. But eventually he did come in after the last election, 2021, when the person who became the candidate of the Conservatives to replace Angela Merkel lost that election. And this was then finally Friedrich Merz's opportunity to kind of sweep in and say, all right, this Merkel era is over. I'm going to take control of the Conservatives and take it more in my direction. And I think, part of his sort of CEO style is partly his personal style, but also, you know, he'd spent the previous decade in business, and this became part of his pitch. You know, I'm a guy who knows business, knows how the economy is working, and especially as the economy has really spluttered in recent years, this has been part of his pitch. I can turn the German economy around.
The counter pitch, though, could be that he has no government experience whatsoever. He hasn't even been mayor of a small town. Is that really the kind of leadership experience that Germany needs at this point in time?
I mean, it's not unknown in other countries. I mean, Donald Trump wasn't the mayor of anywhere either before he became US president, and Friedrich Merz certainly had parliamentary experience in the European Parliament and in the German Parliament. He had roles within the party, you know, within the party in the Parliament. But it's true, he hasn't had any sort of ministerial office. So he's kind of coming in, bang, in the very top job in German politics. And I think some observers do look at some of the challenges he's faced and potential, you know, what some are saying are failures that he's gone through in recent months, and sort of said, well, yeah, he's somebody who's kind of learning politics on the job at the very, very, very high level of politics and making some missteps. And there are things people have pointed to that, you know, the election result. I mean, he and his party won the election just a couple of months ago, but it was their second worst election result ever, after the previous election, which was seen as a complete disaster for the Conservatives. So, you know, 28.5%, I mean, well under 30%, barely more than a quarter of the votes they got. And it only looks good partly in comparison with the Social Democrats, now their coalition partners.
Also had historically bad results.
Who got 16%, you know, which is very far away.
Yeah,
and
the bar is very low right now.
And to put those numbers in context, I mean, these are parties that during the Cold War period would routinely have more than 40%, you know? So, and that's part of this picture that you've had in German politics certainly in the last 30 years or so. A major phenomenon in German politics has been fragmentation. That you've gone from a period where you had a 3- and then 4-party system with these two, a big centre-left bloc, a big centre-right bloc, then a smaller Liberal Party, and then a smaller Green Party. And then in addition to that, you've had a far-left party emerging, then a bit of a jostling around the far-left, then another splinter off the far-left, and then also far-right emerging in the form of the AfD. So you've had this, you know, this fragmentation of German politics, which leads to the fact that it's quite difficult to get a governing majority now in Parliament. So you see these two parties, which used to be these real kind of colossi of German politics, even together, they barely have a squeaky majority in Parliament, and not enough of a majority to vote their guy into the chancellorship.
Exactly, and just this morning I heard an SPD MP give an interview saying that this is not a coalition anyone in the SPD wanted. This is not an alliance they wanted to have to forge. This is basically a union that they entered out of responsibility. Because this is a moment in German politics where stability is needed. Is that the right foot to start a coalition on?
But this has been part of the story of the last several governments that Germany has had because of this fragmentation. I mean, there hasn't been a coalition of natural political bedfellows here in Germany for more than a decade. So if you say, you know, for instance, in the past, you would have, say, the Conservatives and the Liberals. So liberal not in the progressive sense, but liberal in terms of economic liberalisation. That was broadly seen as a centre-right coalition, you know? Or the Social Democrats and the Greens, that was broadly seen as a centre-left or progressive coalition. You know, these were coalitions that were sort of more of, you know, political bedfellows, where they could say, OK, our parties are a bit different, but we're broadly on the same side of the political spectrum. There hasn't been one of those governments since, I think, 2013 here. So since then, it's either been the big centre-right and big centre-left together, no longer as big now as they were, but so really opposite kind of poles, at least, you know, centre-left, centre-right, neither of sort of extremes, but, you know, one is in favour, you know, of higher taxes, more redistribution in the economy towards people with lower incomes. The other ultimately believes in the opposite, you know, and that is obviously not going to be the happiest of marriages. The previous government was another alternative, which was three smaller parties, so the Social Democrats, so the centre-left, plus the Greens, their natural kind of bedfellows, but also plus this pro-business, the Liberals. And that proved to be an unstable coalition, partly because it had three parties in it, but partly because particularly the ideological differences between these Liberals and the Greens and the Social Democrats. So it's been a long time since there's been a really kind of good fit government in Germany. And I think this is where the part of where the story of the Alternative for Germany of the far right comes in, is that people look at these governments and think, you're not effective, you squabble with each other, you know, you get very lowest common denominator decisions, and you know, the problems that we see don't get tackled, and this breeds frustration. And I mean, that's, you know, what we've seen from the last election, 2021, to this election just recently. The AfD pretty much doubled their support. Now they are the biggest opposition party in Parliament.
They are, and they're having a field day with what is happening at the Bundestag today. Michaela was actually able to speak to the head of the party, Alice Weidel. Let's listen in.
Mrs. Weidel, how much of a surprise is it for you, because it's a very big surprise for everyone in this room, that Friedrich Merz was not elected in the first round?
Yes, that is of course a historic defeat for Friedrich Merz. The man is damaged goods, and the so-called governing coalition has been a shambles from the start. The fact that Merz couldn't even get his own people behind him, what kind of government is this supposed to be, if right at the beginning, during his own election, he can't get the people behind him? He's so damaged that it would be reasonable for him to step aside and withdraw. Someone like that can no longer be chancellor. Nobody will take him seriously. Nobody takes Friedrich Merz seriously anymore.
Is it a reason for joy for the AfD?
No, not at all. That seriously harms this country. We criticised that when the so-called traffic light coalition imploded, that no work was being done, that the session weeks in Parliament were suspended, and since then he hasn't been working, and our economy and society are suffering. We have the highest energy prices in the world, so what's that about? We are so economically damaged, and this must be stopped at all costs. We need sensible politics for the good of our country, and to have such a long, drawn-out affair with the nerve of a left-wing coalition agreement, the SPD has determined the content of this coalition agreement, a party with 16%. I mean, how did we get there? The majority of Germans voted for the Conservative Centre. This has been electoral fraud from top to bottom. I personally believe in a higher power, and the call from the top has always been that lies don't get you very far. I've never seen anyone break all their election promises like Friedrich Merz. Such an untrustworthy, characterless person like Friedrich Merz must not become Chancellor of this country, and that is exactly what the Bundestag has proved here today.
I'm a bit surprised that you see a religious reference in it.
Yes, I firmly believe in it. I always believe in higher justice, which also lets me rest in peace. But I have to admit, even I didn't expect it today, and that's a very strong signal. Friedrich Merz is so damaged, and he should simply withdraw.
Many of his critics see him damaged because he sought a majority together with the AfD. He sought a majority for a motion in Parliament, and he was criticized a lot for it. In principle, in your eyes, this was someone you could speak to?
No, not Friedrich Merz at all. He also insulted us. He made below-the-belt comments, and he's the biggest election fraudster of all time, and we can't support a person like that at all. If the CDU were to come up with the idea of putting forward a different candidate for Chancellor, we would discuss that internally. Would we then also support him? But overall, we would not support a black-red government. That is not what the voters voted for. And look at a person like Lars Klingbeil, that a man like that should become finance minister and vice-chancellor. The man, he has no CV at all, he hasn't worked at all in his life, he has no idea about anything, he has an anti-far past, so what's the point there? You can't sell that to the voters in this country at all, what such people do. And really, they have no education, and that should be changed. There should be different rules.
That's your judgment. At the same time, do you believe that there could even be a CDU candidate who could be elected with AfD votes?
Yes, that's the CDU's strategic problem. They've gone down a left-wing strategic blind alley, and we can see the result today.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Weidel.
Richard Walker still here with me. Richard, how do you expect the AfD to seize on this moment?
Yeah, well, I mean, we heard it from Alice Weidel there. I mean, their argument is essentially that these longer-standing parties, the Conservatives are on the centre-right and the Social Democrats on the centre-left, have kind of failed Germany. That this kind of string of grand coalitions and then the three-word coalition that we were just talking about have not addressed Germany's problems. And, you know, their critique of the Conservatives is that they're not conservative enough anymore. And they've attacked Friedrich Merz for... I mean, we heard Alice Weidel there saying that the coalition agreement with the Social Democrats has got a lot of Social Democrats kind of points in it, that they negotiated pretty well in this. And particularly there's been a lot of criticism from the AfD, but also from some on the right of the Conservative Party, that Friedrich Merz went too far in loosening Germany's borrowing rules, which have been very, very strong until now. There was, you know, what's called a debt brake in the Constitution. So brake as in handbrake, not brake as in shatter. And that was designed to have very, very, very tight limits on what governments can borrow. And I think for two reasons, this has been seen now as unsustainable by this incoming coalition. On the one hand, because it needs to spend a lot more on defence because of the threat coming from Russia and because of the prospect of the Americans playing much less of a role in European defence in the future. And then on the other hand, because of the need for investment in infrastructure. And this was particularly a strong point of the Social Democrats, saying that there's been not enough, and a lot of Germans witness that, you know, every day of their lives, that trains are running late, you know, bridges are crumbling. There's a sense that Germany has underinvested in its infrastructure. The AfD says that, you know, this is you know, a breach of trust with the German population, that it's important to have these rules on debt, but also they're accusing Friedrich Merz of breaking election promises. And indeed, during the election campaign, Friedrich Merz had indicated that he wanted to stick with this constitutional debt break. And, you know, everything seemed to change once he was coming into office. So that's really the pitch of the AfD. And I think when they're looking at what's going on today, they say, well, this is just more evidence for this failure of these mainstream parties. You know, Friedrich Merz comes in saying that he wants to, you know, provide new leadership to Germany, and he can't even lead his coalition to back him in this crucial vote.
But they gladly backed him when he pushed for tighter immigration. Controls. So what is, in general, the relationship that the AfD has as the biggest party in the opposition now with the CDU?
I mean, this is really going to be very interesting to watch in the coming years, because the AfD, they've always talked about 2029 is going to be their year. So that's the next time an election will come up here in Germany. And they're saying that they want to be the biggest party there, that maybe they would be part of a governing coalition. So there's a lot of, you know, it's going to be very interesting to see what is their strategy in pursuing that goal. Do they try to kind of moderate and indicate that they want to cooperate with other parties, particularly the Conservatives, seeing the Conservatives as potentially a coalition partner? Or do they actually think, well, you know, it's working so far for us of being pretty radical, pretty strident kind of anti-system party, and try to aim for, you know, some sort of overall majority? I think those in the know seem to, you know, watching the AfD, that there are no signs so far of it trying to moderate its message on a lot of areas. But of course, it's early days, and we'll be looking ahead. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see not just the AfD's approach, so where do they offer cooperation, where do they try to kind of torpedo things in Parliament, but also how does this governing coalition, how do the Conservatives particularly approach the AfD? And there are differing voices within the Conservatives. There are some who say, you know, we should never touch them with a barge pole. There are others, particularly in some of the eastern regions in Germany, who think, you know, why do we keep doing these unhappy coalitions with the centre-left when we've got, you know, these people on the on the right side of politics who are kind of ideologically closer to us. Why do we keep demonizing
the head of the parliamentary group of the CDU-CSU, he's advocating for a renewed approach to the AFD, whatever that may mean.
Yeah. So he's an interesting figure because he's someone who's on the right of the Conservative Party. He has he's now become their leader of the party group within the parliament, so a very important role. So he's going to be absolutely key to this. And he had indicated that, you know, it's important to deal with opposition parties as opposition parties, you know, and not necessarily to kind of demonize. But there was yet another thing that just came in a couple of days ago. So obviously we were reporting on this here, that that Germany's domestic intelligence service, which is called the Office for the Protection of the Constitution. So this is kind of like the watchdog in Germany that was set up after the Second World War, after the Nazi era, to try to prevent threats to the democratic constitution, which came in Germany after the Second World War. It declared the AfD party to be a right-wing extremist organisation. Now, parts of the AfD had already been designated as such, but now this body is saying, actually, look at the entire party, and particularly for its view that it simply does not follow the constitutional recognition that all people are equal, but seems to see, for instance, Muslim Germans as second-class citizens. It says that this is grounds to declare this party to be right-wing extremist. Now, the AfD is challenging that in the courts, so this has no legal standing at the moment while that process is going on. But this raises the question in German constitutional thinking, well, if a party is an enemy of the constitution, should it be banned? And two parties have been banned in the 1950s in post-war Germany, you know, as democracy was kind of settling into place in Germany. So a communist party and a far-right party were banned in the 1950s. Later, there were attempts to ban an outright Nazi party, a neo-Nazi party in this century, the NPD. Those efforts failed because this party essentially was seen as too insignificant to be a real threat to the German constitutional order. But here we're talking about the biggest opposition party in Germany. This creates huge dilemmas for the government, for the parliament, because any initiative to move towards a ban of the party would come from either the government or the parliament. It would be the constitutional court that ultimately decides whether a party should be banned. But can you really ban a party with 21% of the population supporting it? You know, in some polls recently, the party has been the #1 party. So there's a huge debate going on among the other parties about what is the right approach there. And this is going to be one of the big dilemmas for this new government coming in, how to deal with that party. Do you debate it on the political arena, or do you see it as such a threat that you have to take legal action against it?
Yeah, and it's a matter that the US has actually chimed in too. Yeah. What have they been saying about all of this?
So, I mean, this has, how to deal with the AfD has the potential to really split mainstream German politics. Well, it also has the potential to split the transatlantic relationship even further. And we first saw this in February at the Munich Security Conference here in Germany. J.D. Vance, the new vice president, came to that conference and he gave a speech. I was there, which was a diatribe against European democracy and particularly against Germany for how it deals with far-right parties. And he would say these are not far-right parties. They represent legitimate concerns of the population, particularly about migration. And almost seeming to indicate a kind of a culture war between the US administration and many European governments, which are trying to deal with what they see as a potential threat to their democracies in the form of these far-right parties. The Trump administration sees a lot of ideological overlap with these parties over issues like migration. There are some weird ironies in there because the AfD is actually it's got a lot of anti-Americanism within the AfD, so that doesn't completely kind of fit with that. But the signals from the Trump administration are disruptive, like, you know, seeming to want to kind of puff up the AfD party. It looks like we may have something just about happening.
Let's see, we're looking at the Bundestag president, Julia Klöckner. If you're just joining us now, we are following the second vote in the German Bundestag today to elect Friedrich Merz as the next German chancellor. He failed in the first round. That was historic for Germany. That has never happened before. Now we're seeing the acting.
Olaf Scholz, exactly.
The acting, still acting, and he did not expect that. He left the room today shaking his head, incredulous, greeting the President of Parliament.
No, he's looking a bit happier, just shaking the hand of the parliamentary speaker there. But yeah, Olaf Scholz, of course, somebody who was accused of not being able to run a stable coalition. And presumably he's thinking today, well, at least I managed to get my coalition to vote me in as chancellor on the first round. So he might have some crocodile tears there.
How much does this rocky start, if this actually does lead to Merz being elected chancellor, how much does that weaken him on the international stage when Germany's leadership, not only in Europe, but on the world stage, is very much needed, and it's something that he promised to bring back?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we don't know yet. I mean, if he gets through on this second round, and then if, he puts in a good performance as chancellor, it's possible that this will end up kind of being seen as, an early hiccup, know? But, of course, it might not go back that way. It could be an omen of problems to come. And I think, there is concern, particularly around Europe, that Germany has not shown its usual political stability in recent years, that the divisions within the previous government under Olaf Scholz that we just saw there, we were talking about earlier, with 3 parties in it, with ideological differences, they often just couldn't make their minds up. They were fighting. And this had real knock-on effects for Europe. Europe requires all of the members of the European Union to say, OK, we want to do this together. And it was said that often a meeting or a decision in Europe on the European level was held up because Germany's own government couldn't decide what Germany should do. So how can you get a Europe to decide what it should do if Germany can't even make up its own mind? So that definitely had a knock-on effect. And I think this is going to be, fueling some of those questions. People looked at Friedrich Merz and they thought, OK, here's a guy who's coming in, he's making very positive noises about Europe, saying, he wants to bring back Germany to the heart of Europe. He wants to become a driving force again. He wants to work closely with the French, with whom there was a dysfunctional relationship in recent years. He wants to reach out to the Polish government. There have often been tensions between the Polish and German governments. He wants to stand strongly by the side of Ukraine. So a lot of stuff that other European countries like to hear, that he wanted to invest in defence, that he wanted to improve European cooperation around defence. All of these things are going to be very important if the Americans really do, increasingly cut their ties from Europe in terms of defence. If the Russians continue to be such a severe threat as they appear to be, continuing to be right now. So all of this was seen as very positively. But of course, that is predicated on Merz actually being able to deliver this leadership that he was promising. And there will, I guarantee there'll be people out there thinking, OK, so how can you lead Europe if you can't even lead, a few people in your own coalition?
He has paved the way towards his ascension to power for a month now, over a month since the election. While Olaf Scholz was still in power, he went to the Munich Security Conference. He held meetings with dignitaries from all over the world. What can you tell us about where he has positioned himself in that time since the election?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen him, but also you've seen the man who he wants to bring in as foreign minister, Johann Wadephul. You've seen both of them kind of touring around outreach. He spoke to us at DW just at the Munich Security Conference as well. That was actually just before the election. And there's been a lot of signalling. Also, he made a major foreign policy speech shortly before the election. That foreign policy is going to be a big part of his chancellorship. Often you think about leaders, they kind of come into government with a lot of domestic objectives, but then they kind of get sucked into foreign policy issues. This happens to a lot of presidents in the United States. You've seen that happen to people here as well. Well, he's coming in really very conscious, I think, that foreign policy is going to be a big issue. And there are some bureaucratic signals in that direction as well. For instance, that his foreign minister will be a member of his party and who is somebody who is loyal to him. this sounds normal, but actually for the past 60 years or so, there's never been a foreign minister from the same party as from the chancellor. So the foreign minister job has usually been a kind of high prestige job that goes to the leader or a senior figure in the junior party in a coalition, which, works in terms of, some of the thinking about how do you put a coalition together and you want to keep both parties feeling that they've got nice, important jobs. But it's not great for, the function of the foreign minister if, the foreign minister is talking to the foreign minister of some other country, and that foreign minister is thinking, OK, when I talk to you, am I really talking to the boss or am I talking to you with your agenda? And we saw that between the outgoing foreign minister Annalena Baerbock, who was from the Green Party, and Olaf Scholz. They had quite different views on issues, particularly China. Olaf Scholz really didn't want to rock the boat in relations with China, seeing it as economically so important. Annalena Baerbock saw China as a real kind of systemic threat to Germany and to the world order. And this meant that she would go to China, say something critical, but the Chinese would think, well, it doesn't matter. The boss doesn't think like that. So I think by choosing to have the foreign ministry, or by keeping the foreign ministry within his own party, Friedrich Merz is sending a signal that he treats foreign policy very seriously. And also he's establishing a National Security Council to be in his own office in the Chancellery. This is something that's been talked about for a long time. A little bit perhaps like in the United States, this is in the White House you have the National Security Council, which is where all of the kind of, the bureaucratic links between the State Department for Foreign Policy and the Department of Defense and the spy community all kind of come together. The Chancellery will have a similar body. So these are all signals from Merz that he takes foreign policy seriously. And I think these are signals that overseas are being seen pretty positively, because it's often been a criticism of Germany that it hasn't been sufficiently strategic in thinking long-term about defence, about security, about geopolitics.
Let's look at the rest of the cabinet briefly, maybe, because there were some surprises.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting to think that some of those surprises could have played a role in what happened today. So Friedrich Merz has named a couple of non-politicians to important jobs. For instance, the Ministry of the Economy. So obviously in a time where the economy is in difficulty, that's seen as a very important ministry. That has gone to a woman called Katharina Reiche, who is the head of an energy infrastructure company. She's a former politician, but not a current politician. So she was in the Bundestag some years ago, left, went into the private sector, and now Friedrich Merz has brought her back. And the message being, we need to sort out our economy, but we also need to sort out energy supply. Who could be better to do that than somebody from the energy industry? And he's done something similar on a new digital ministry, which is to be headed by a guy who ran one of the biggest digital products retailers in Germany. And I think his message is, OK, forget politics, let's get people who are they know their stuff. But within the ranks of his party, there's apparently been grumbling, or some people are disappointed, because there are people now in the parliament who thought, well, I would have quite liked to be minister of this, or I would have liked to be minister of that. And there are fewer jobs to go around for people within the party. So this goes a bit to what we were talking about his political nous. Whether he has a deep enough kind of tentacles into the party and a deep enough sense of the sensitivities of the people whose votes he needs in Parliament, that part of politics is kind of keeping your team kind of happy and on side. So it's possible, of course we're speculating here, but this could have played a role in his poor vote just earlier.
We'll see how it plays out the second time around. I believe counting is now underway. You stay right here until the results come in. I want to bring in Katja Hoyer. She's a historian, author, and visiting research fellow at King's College in London. Katja, are you there with us?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Great to have you on the show. Now, this is a truly unprecedented moment for Germany, the first time in the country's post-war history that a chancellor in waiting has failed to get a vote. What are your thoughts on what happened today in the German parliament?
Well, the word unprecedented is often overused, I find, but in this case it actually applies in the sense that this just hasn't happened since 1949. And I think people sometimes underestimate just how much the specter of political instability, is still there with Germany because of its past, because of the way that instability itself is seen as a threat to the status quo. I think other Western democracies are more able to just say, okay, it's not great when a government isn't functioning, but we'll survive. Whilst I think Germany's experience with the sort of failed democratic experiment after the First World War that then led to Nazism is a very different one. And I think because of that, people are always more frightened what instability might mean. So even today, we heard throughout the day people referring to the Weimar Republic, the rise of the Nazis, and we're of course only 2 days away from the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. So all of this is very much on people's minds right now.
Do you expect this to be a lasting blow to political stability and public trust in Germany, or could this turn out to just be a blip if now the second round of voting goes through?
Well, I think whatever happens now, this is certainly an additional blow, in addition to all the other things that have happened over the last few sort of months, even years now. I think we have seen a hollowing out of sort of public trust in institutions for quite a while now. So surveys show that people trust politicians, political parties, institutions, even the public offices, sort of less and less. And when they see something like today, where there's just an obvious sign that something isn't working, and that it is very different from kind of, shallower crises, if you will, that we've seen before, then there is worry, I think, that this might be a more permanent blow to the sort of perception that the German public have of politics. And I think the other thing to bear in mind is that Friedrich Merz had set out to do things differently. He'd been criticizing Olaf Scholz and his government for the permanent strife and the arguing in that coalition. And he said that he wanted to build a very different coalition that was based on consent. And now we see the opposite before he's even taken office. So I do think there'll be a permanent bit of damage there, even if he does win this second round of voting.
The biggest opposition party, the Alternative for Germany, has actually called Merz damaged goods and called for fresh elections. What exactly is the AfD trying to do here, you think?
Yeah, I mean, they would say that, obviously, now that they are doing particularly well in the polling. They're, neck and neck really with the Conservatives, with the CDU, CSU in a lot of the polls now. So, it could only be in their interest really to call for new elections, as they'd likely come out stronger out of that. But I get the feeling that there's a bit of a divide there in the party between people who just want to see everything in chaos and destroyed because they feel it works in their favor. The more discord, the more chaos there is, the higher their vote will be. And then there's the other half that tries to sort of strike a more reasonable tone in order to come across as a more responsible political party that perhaps more reluctant conservative voters can vote for. And I think even today in the parliamentary debate, we've seen both of these sides, and it's not always clear which way the leadership leans.
What will Germany's partners and allies internationally be thinking after seeing what's happened in the Bundestag today?
Well, I'm here in the UK, and it certainly feels like people are quite shocked by this. I think there was a lot of hope and optimism that the new government, or a new government under Friedrich Merz, could bring a sort of more stable and more assertive Germany back onto the European political landscape. And I feel that today has really put a spanner in the works with that, because it's the opposite of what people were hoping for. So internationally, I think there's a lot of interest certainly in this. People are watching this very carefully. And a lot of concern as to what this might mean going forward, because even if Friedrich Merz now wins the second round, it still doesn't mean that going forward he's got the support of his own coalition. So this kind of scenario might be repeated when Germany is trying to make, big decisions for itself, for Europe, and more widely perhaps in the international context. So this is being watched with a lot of concern.
What lessons do you think can be drawn from the past about where German politics might head next after this?
Well, I'm not one of these people as a historian who sort of compares everything to the 1920s and the 1930s. I think there are some parallels that are worrying, such as the sort of political and economic instability, but none of that is on a scale as we did see after the First World War. And I think the other big difference that people often sort of don't pay enough attention to is the fact that the Nazi Party was a revolutionary party. They did try initially to overthrow the state by force. And even when they decided in the sort of late 1920s that they're going down a legal route and they want to be elected into power in order to then destroy democracy, they still then had an army of about 4 million men out on the streets in the SA and the SS with which to use, political pressure. So I don't think it's quite the same. People do need to bear history in mind, but not to the
Katja,
point
sorry
of
to interrupt you. I think we're getting the
simplistic
results from that second round of voting in the Bundestag. Sorry to interrupt you there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Votes against, 289. Abstentions, 1. There will be time to applaud in a moment, but I would like to note that MP Friedrich Merz has now got the necessary majority of 316 votes. According to Article 63, para 2, he has now been elected Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. Now, before you all come and congratulate him, I would like to ask you for a moment here, because we have to ask the Chancellor whether he wishes to accept the result. MP Merz, do you accept the result of these elections? President of the Bundestag, I'm grateful for the trust and I accept the results of voting. Chancellor, congratulations on behalf of the entire Parliament on your election. I wish you a lot of strength and a lot of success in tackling all of the challenges facing you. And the result of this election is one that I will now share with the German president. And for the MPs, what that means is that we expect at 6:15 p.m. the swearing of the oath of office. We will inform you by a gong and will resume this session in plenty of time. So 6:15 is the time that I've been told for the swearing of the oath of office. Should it be sooner, we will let you know. It depends on how quickly the traffic allows you to go to the Bellevue Palace. I now interrupt proceedings.
And that is not really the end, but the happy ending, at least. Halfway through a very long day for now almost Chancellor Friedrich Merz. He has to still go to the Bellevue Palace to accept the post from the German president and then return to the Bundestag to swear the oath of office. Richard Walker here in the studio with me. What a day.
Yeah, what a day.
What do you think is going through Friedrich Merz's mind now?
Yeah, so let's, of course, we just came to that. It got slightly eclipsed. So 325 votes is what he got this time.
Still 3 short from the number of MPs in his coalition.
That's right. So his coalition, if you add the parties together, has 328. In the first round, now 6 hours ago or so, the result came through that he had 310. So he's managed to add 15 members of that coalition, but there seem to be 3 pretty stubborn holdouts. It's going to be interesting to see if those names ever kind of come through if anybody actually kind of outs themselves as somebody who didn't support him, even on this second round. But you can see the relief on his face. And I think, as we've just heard, it was great to talk to Katja Hoyer just then, but as you started to see in the little box in the corner, Friedrich Merz coming back into the chamber, it made me recall 6 hours ago when he was coming back into the chamber after the first round. And that first time he looked pretty deathly kind of pale, and this time his body language was definitely more positive. So, and what we see here is people from all sorts of parties kind of lining up to congratulate him. So he's just shaking the hand there of Heidi Reicheneck. She's one of the leaders of the Left Party.
Not a fan of Merz's.
Not a fan of Merz normally, and one of the kind of surprise stars of the election just early this year, who came through and had a terrific social media presence, and the Left Party did much better than expected. They're a party very much on the opposite pole of German politics from the Conservatives, but you know, they contributed to what we're seeing here by going along with this idea of pulling forward this vote today. So that's quite an interesting kind of taboo that's been broken during the course of this day. But it's interesting to see what we see here of people from all these different parties coming to congratulate Merz. So that's a little bit of this sort of symbol of, you know, German politics, you know, still not being quite as divisive as politics in some of the countries where you might not get such a scene.
Yeah. Our chief political editor, Michaela Küfner, is standing by following everything that's going on in the Bundestag today. Let's bring in Michaela. Relief, I imagine, where you are.
Yes, and it was quite striking how Friedrich Merz, the first time round when he, in this surprise, shocking defeat, didn't get the majority needed, the 316 votes. He sat there, then he packed up his pen, and then he left. And this time it looked like he was he just remained seated, as if in shock that it had actually worked out this time around. So he'd clearly braced himself for another surprising defeat, potentially. Everybody knew this time around what was on the line here. This would have had the potential to derail his ambitions to become chancellor on that very final stretch. Now he is elected German chancellor. He will now head over to the German president to receive his appointment there, and then we will see the same with the individual ministers from Friedrich Merz's camp, but also the Social Democrats. But this really was a moment of relief that was billed to everybody as really a moment of glory that it was set up to be, and the election of a chancellor is expected to be exactly that, the crowning moment after 2 months of coalition building, of signing a coalition deal with the Social Democrats, finding common ground. And this was supposed to be simply the execution of what had been politically agreed until, of course, individual MPs derailed it. Not a small number, 18, didn't give him their vote in the end. Now he's felt the very harsh force of a parliament of individual MPs. And he really sat there taking in that moment of, well, victory, but there was no glory in this, that's for sure.
Not only today, but in general, it's been a rocky road to power for him. What kind of leader can we expect him to be?
Well, he's built himself as a decisive leader who will end the whole notion of the so-called German vote, where Germany continues to sit on the fence. He has the money to do it. He has 500 billion in extra debt to put towards infrastructure investment here in Germany. He has essentially carte blanche if there's the political will to take on debt for defense. So he overcame that debt break. At the same time, he did a U-turn on his bid not to touch that debt break. He had, and that's something he himself described as a political loan that he had taken out that he would have to pay back very soon once in office. Now, today, he felt that, and the world saw that whatever he pledges internationally can be and is likely to be conditional of approval by his own parliament and his own parliamentary groups, which he didn't really have a grip on. So that does not really radiate power domestically or internationally. So this is something that he will have to disprove. It's not a nice way. It's not a very strong appearance as the first appearance as a German chancellor.
One thing many Germans are concerned about, and maybe we can briefly touch on that. We just saw him shaking the hands of the AfD parliamentary group there. What do you expect him to do? Well, what do you expect to be his dealing with them? Because he has been open to cooperation with them before, then he's pedaled back on that. What can we expect on that front?
Well, he accepted AfD votes to gain a majority in parliament, which some described as cooperation. He still denies that. The AfD was set up to, and I quote from one of its founder, to chase the conservative CDU down, and he will have to fend them off, also from gaining ground more in German politics. This after they just doubled to 20.8% in the last election, so he has his work cut out for him.
That was DW Chief Political Editor Michaela Küfner from the Bundestag there. Thank you so much. And before we go, I also want to thank our Chief International Editor, Richard Walker, for sitting tight all this time with me. Thank you so much for all those insights. Thank you for coming into the studio. And now it's time to get you all caught up on what we're doing here today. Our top story is, of course, the fact that elected German chancellor secured the post in a second ballot after suffering a historic defeat in the first vote in Germany's post-war history. No chancellor candidate had ever failed to win enough votes to secure the office on the first ballot. Merz secured 325 votes on the second vote, needing 316 to win the chancellorship. And that's all from us here in Berlin. Remember, you can also get updates and analysis of the clock on the DW app or on our website. That is dw.com. You can also follow us on social media. Our handle there is @DW News. I'm Nicole Fröhlich. This is Richard Walker. Thank you so much for watching.